Hello, BookTube. It's a gray and overcast Monday today. What better day, what better occasion for reading you a poem? So I'm going to continue with my little fad here of reading you a poem a day. Why not, right? And I'm not the only one. I will leave links. Not Just Book Reviews read another poem today, and he did a terrific job reading a Les Murray poem, pretty much the first Les Murray poem that's been read on BookTube. And David Wiley read Christopher Marlowe poem, and they both did a fine job. And I think you can agree that when the news is really dark and stressful, or the weather is really dark and stressful, a little poetry goes a long way. So I'm going to read you a poem today as well. And I was originally going to go back to the Norton Anthology of Poetry. But then I pulled this book off the shelf. I don't want to block the bean. I pulled this. This is the Barnes and Noble edition of Moby Dick, the first one that they did. Lovely hardcover with sewn binding and filled with. Okay, all right. It's filled with color illustrations by Mark Summers. But when I opened it, I found this. Oh my! Look at that. Just look at the combination there. That is baby. That is my little queenie. And there on the other side is the bean, and they are separated by 50 years. So, oh my. Okay, well, let me. It isn't all Queenie in here. This is going to be. Yes, there we go. There's Mark Summers illustrating Captain Ahab. Those are all original for this volume, and make it a lovely thing. This was an idea. This was a dream that an editorial crew at Barnes and Noble had 30 years ago, more than that, to bring out really nice editions of canonical classics. Really, not just a standard reprint. Barnes & Noble did that. In fact, at the time that this came out, they were doing their reprints in sort of urine yellow, the urine yellow dust jacket, as cheap as could be. No introductions, standard clip art on the cover, because that's a market you don't want to let go, right? If you can make one of those and distribute it widely, and yours is $1 less than the next one, then every student in the country who has to read that book is going to buy yours. You stand to, especially it costs you almost nothing to make. You stand to make a tidy amount. This was an inversion of that vision. This was, let's spend some money in order to make a truly gorgeous edition that book people will want, not just students with a gun to their head, but book people. So they did this with original illustrations and a gorgeous setup, a gorgeous physical setup, an introduction by Mark Halperin. And they did also a lovely edition, same thing, Mark Summers illustrations for Gulliver's Travels, which I have never seen. I got a copy at the bookstore and got rid of it to the next person who wanted a really pretty Gulliver's Travels. I've never seen it since used. For all I know, that and this Moby Dick have become collectible. And I think they did one more volume in this series of sort of nice upscale canonical classics. I think it was an edition of Dracula with gory illustrations rather than Mark Summers, who had left by then. The dream was to have him locked in for a whole bunch of books, much like N.C. Wyeth doing the Scribner illustrated classics, but that was not to be. We don't necessarily have to lay that at the feet of the stress of working with the Riggio brothers, but it could be. It could very well be. This volume I loved. I got a copy as soon as the store got it, and then a year later we got a stack of remainders of this book, of this volume, and I got every one of them. I think I bought all of the remainders. I waited a day to see if any customers would want them, and then I just got them all. They were like $7 a piece, and eventually got rid of all of them. I was left with one that was really beaten to pieces, and I showed it on this channel years ago, and one of you, typically from my viewers, decided to replace it with a new copy. So I don't know where that beaten up copy is, but I have this one. And I pulled this down off the shelf. I swear not to look at my beagle. And came across a poem. They end this very nice volume with a poem. So I thought that would be our poem for today. This is At Melville's Tomb by the poet Hart Crane. Often beneath the wave, wide from this ledge, the dice of drowned men's bones he saw bequeath an embassy. Their numbers, as he watched, beat on the dusty shore and were obscured. And wrecks passed without sound of bells, the calyx of death's bounty giving back a scattered chapter, livid hieroglyph, the port and wound of corridors of shells. Then in the circuit calm of one vast coil, its lashing charm and malice reconciled, frosted eyes that lifted altars, and silent answers crept across the stars. Compass, quadrant, and sextant contrive no further tides. High in the azure steeps, Monody shall not wake the mariner. This fabulous shadow only the sea keeps. And that is by Hart Crane, the poor doomed Hart Crane, who was let down by society as much as any poet could be. He was rife with weaknesses, but society didn't help at all. No one reached out to help, and that's a terrible shame. He ended up killing himself at a very young age when he was racked with neuroses. His Christian Science upbringing made him think that his own homosexuality was a monstrous, perverted evil. He was an alcoholic, which didn't help any, and which was not addressed. The mind frame of the time, almost 100 years ago when he was an alcoholic, was that there was no such thing, or that only the dregs of society were that, and that it could be for anyone else just a compensation, just a refuge. And there was no one in his life to tell him that if you're taking refuge in your drug, you're an addict. I don't know that it would have made a difference, but he wrote, we're lucky that even though he died very young, we have a large amount of beautiful poetry from him. Although the beauty is suspect. To me, the beauty is suspect. I love this poem, but you can already see creeping in here the modernism that would eventually destroy poetry. It would eventually make it a boutique operation by a group of viciously arrogant a-holes that don't want it to be comprehensible to anybody except their little friend group at readings. They don't want it to be comprehensible. They wear their incomprehensibility as a badge of honor. And you can see that creeping in this poem a lot, right? The poem doesn't ever actually say what it wants to say. The lines come up to what they want to say, but they don't actually say it. And that leaves it open. That leaves it open for you to wonder, well, is this really what the poem is saying? Or is this... That opens the door for poets to write baldly self-referential stuff that no one is going to understand unless they grew up with the poet, or unless they've been, high with the poet and the poet has shared a childhood memory. That's where these images come from. One of the hallmarks of that kind of modernist, intentionally incomprehensible poetry will be the hauling in of language that people don't use, right? That's when you see poetry starting to migrate way up to the top of a tower on Mount Helicon, where it doesn't want to be comprehended by anyone. And this poem is full of that sort of stuff. It's lovely. But for instance, in the first stanza, often beneath the wave, wide from this ledge, the dice of drowned men's bones he saw bequeath an embassy. Okay, who is the he? We can assume that's Melville. How did he see something that was happening far beneath the wave? And how do you bequeath an embassy? You don't know. The English doesn't explain that. So you have to wonder. And that's a door left open that I would rather poetry had never opened into, are you cool enough to get this? Because the poem, the words in the poem won't tell it to you. And there are other examples, right? Their numbers, as he watched, beat on the dusty shore and were obscured. The numbers of what? Drowned men's bones? Dice? The embassy? And why would any of those things be obscured? They become harder to see? They don't become harder to see. Those things don't become harder to see because they beat on a shore, which means the author is using both embassy and bequeath and obscure in personal ways that aren't the ways of the word themselves. So that when you're reading it, you have to wonder in what I would argue is a way that you should never have to wonder with a poem. I know that makes me a plebeian when it comes to poets, but there are other examples here. What's another one? And Rex passed without sound of bells, the calyx of death's bounty giving back a scattered chapter, livid hieroglyph, the portent wound in corridors of shells. Okay, how does a portent wind? And off the top of your head, what's a calyx? C-A-L-Y-X. What's a calyx off the top of your head? You don't know. You aren't supposed to know. You're supposed to not know. That bothers me. That very much bothers me. And it goes on from there. I mean, those aren't the only examples. It ends up being a lovely poem. You are certain that you are in the presence of a lovely poem, but you're just that one step away from understanding why it's lovely. And that bothers me. Like, for instance, the two other poems that came up today on Poetry Monday. In the Marlowe poem, it might be a little outdated because poets don't sing, they don't write love songs to their beloved anymore because they love themselves. They don't love anyone else. They don't even know that anyone else exists. They have two relationships in their lives, themselves and tobacco. But at least you can read that poem and know exactly what's going on, which frees you to concentrate on how beautiful it is, on how well it's done. The Les Murray poem, Not Just Book Reviews, does a great job reading the poem. Go and listen to the poem and then ask yourself when it's done. When you listen to him once, ask yourself what the poem's about. I know it's poetry has moved to such a place that they sneer at the very idea that someone would ask what it's about. And I believe that was the mainstream of that idea was the death of popular poetry. And that's a shame because popular poetry was really, really good. It's really, really enjoyable. But if you get through with the reading of that poem and you don't know what it's about, you're in good company. Lots of people didn't. You can figure out what it's about, or more likely, you can decide what you say it's about. But if I say that the Marlowe poem that David reads is about the Spanish succession, I will be wrong. I will simply be wrong. I could probably make a case, probably somewhere out there in academia, someone has made a case that the Les Murray poem is about the Spanish succession, and there's no way in the poem to tell that it's not. In this Hart Crane poem, would you know that it's about Melville if his name weren't in the title? No. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't have any idea who the he is in the poem, or even what the he is. But the poem itself is lovely, so we're going to stick with that for Poetry Monday, and we'll be on to something else next time. I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.